Welcome to Spooky Ass Shit. I am your host, Eric Dwinells, and tonight I am joined by not one, but two very special guests. Ladies, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Olivia.
And I'm Mackenzie.
And we are Death by Champagne, the podcast.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we are super excited to be here.
We're super excited to have you here. Now, I've talked about your show on my show before, because you were kind enough to talk about my show on your show before. So I always look to give a trade, but as I told my listeners, I don't just say it to be nice. I say it because it's true. I actually listen to the show, and I think that our listeners, probably there'd be a lot of crossover because, you know, we talk about similar things, true crime, spooky stuff. I go a little bit further afield with my stuff, but just random nature. The last episode I did was about scary commercials.
Oh.
Yeah. So, you know, but you guys mostly stick to true crime and sometimes paranormal stuff, right?
Yes.
Yeah, those are our main two hitters every time.
Yeah. More true crime than anything else. But we try to tie in.
Yes. I'm always down for a true crime that ends in a haunting.
Yes.
It seems like most of them do, or they will at some point.
They can.
Yeah. All right. So, but we have actually met in person, briefly. And
Yes.
only kind of, I suppose you would say, because you met me in character.
Yes.
Yes.
As the Witchfinder General, the one and only Witchfinder General of Salem, Massachusetts, officially licensed by the city and recognized by the Salem PD in the honor of my good works in the discovery of witches. Now, at the time, we put Olivia on trial.
Yes, we did.
But Mackenzie doesn't look so innocent herself.
She is not. Far from it.
And I do have to warn my listeners that we are then, of course, speaking to a convicted witch tonight.
I am.
You guilty.
Guilty as fuck.
I think it's the first time on the podcast that I've had a actual convicted witch. But now, of course, you ladies came up to me, and so yes, I think it was kind of early in the day, and there wasn't a huge crowd or anything, and it was kind of a mellow time. But Olivia came up, put her on trial. She was found guilty, of course, and then you guys noticed that I had my cards for the podcast, which I bring to advertise the podcast, and of course, you know, I meet hundreds of people each day, so even if just a small fraction end up taking a card, someone will listen, hopefully. And I think it was Mackenzie was like, oh, he has a podcast. And the way she said it, to be honest with you, I thought you were about to fuck with me. Because people do, like when you're a street performer, luckily it's only a handful of people, usually a year, but there are people who will like fuck with you and be like tween girls are especially mean a lot of times.
Oh, they are vicious.
Yeah, they'll be like,
the worst.
they'll walk by and they'll be like, how much do you hate your life right now? Like,
Oh my
seriously, how much do you
God.
hate your life? And like other people will push me or pull down my stockings and, you know, like whatever. But yeah, it gets rough out there. Meanwhile, not only is it like something that I really like to do, it's literally my favorite thing to do. And it's not, I don't do it for money. Like, as you guys even said on your podcast, like, yes, I do accept donations, but I don't demand them, you know, and I don't chase people down for them or anything. Some street people do, you know, but I have a real job. Like, I'm a manager somewhere. I have employees. But on the weekends in October, I'm also the Witchfinder, you know. So anyway, I found out, though, of course, that they were not fucking with me. The reason they were excited about the podcast was because they have a podcast. So that's
Yes.
where the little kernel of this idea exchange started.
I think some of that attitude probably comes with anytime we tell someone we have a podcast, I have like a small shaky cringe moment where I'm like, they're going to roll their eyes and go, oh, the two girls in the bar wearing all black have a podcast naturally.
Right. Just like
of course
judgy.
you do.
Now, I wrote to these ladies and I said, hey, do you guys want to come on the show? And they said yes. And then I offered them a few choices of subjects that we could cover. And I was not at all surprised with the choice that they went with, given that they are generally true crime people and all that stuff. Of course, they picked a murder case. And not only a murder case, but a trial that took place in Salem. Because now you guys, I should mention, you guys are in St. Louis, Missouri.
Yes. We are far from Salem.
Very
Yeah.
far.
We wish we were in Salem.
Whole different time zone. Yeah. Well, that's what I was going to say. It seems to me like when you came to Salem, you kind of fell in love with the place.
Yes.
Oh, yeah. I think we anticipated falling in love with it, but not so much in the way that it was like, even if none of this spooky stuff existed here, we would still
just
come
everything
back.
Else. Yeah,
like, who knows
weather.
if the town would be the same if that wasn't the history, but
Yeah.
just being around like all these like-minded people who are celebrating Halloween, walking around, having a great time. It was, I mean, probably like top 5 days of my life.
Agreed. 100%. And that was our first trip together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Massachusetts in general is great for spooky history and crime history. If you guys ever come out again, let me know, and we'll go on a little tour of spooky Massachusetts. Okay. I forget everything that you guys said you checked out on your show, but honestly, a lot of the so-called museums in Salem are a little tourist trappy.
Yes,
and
we learned that.
Once you've seen one of certain ones, you've seen them all, you know. So unless you have a guide to tell you like what is worth checking out and what is not, like you're going to probably be kind of disappointed, especially if you go and you have to wait an hour or two in line to get into a place, and then you go and you're like, this was the fucking same thing as the last one with the broken mannequins. You know?
That's exactly. It was all like mannequins that smelled like a church basement.
And wax figures. All of it.
Yeah. And there's one, did you guys go, I think it's in the Witch Village. No, it's the Witch History Museum.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
We went to that one.
Yeah, I think that was the first one.
Yeah, that was. It was the very first one we went to. And we walked inside and we were like, what is happening in here?
Yeah. That's the one where you start upstairs and there's like the diorama of the Indians attacking.
Yes.
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 I walked in and I was like, oh no, what's about to go down?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's one of the better ones, really, because it's spaced out. You get an up close look. The mannequins in general aren't broken, but there is one where there's a courtroom scene, and there is a black figure, which you think is supposed to be Tituba, but then they explain that it's actually not Tituba; it's somebody else. But it is clearly a white mannequin painted brown.
Oh God.
Oh no.
And I took a picture of it last time I was in there, and I was like, I feel like this mannequin is actively being racist at me.
It's just offensive on the whole. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff happening in those museums that we were just like, it was great to experience it, but we were like, when we go back, we're not going to do that again.
Yeah.
Well, even the bad ones, there's still a charm to them.
Yeah.
Like, you know, it's still, you're not going there for high art value most of the time. You know,
True.
if you want that, go to the PBD-Essex Museum. But we are not here to talk about witchy stuff. Exactly. We are here to talk about the murder trial of Jessie Costello. And we're going to get into that right after I remind everyone, because I almost forgot just now, to check out my show's website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. They both take you to the same place, and that is the show's blog page. From there, you can listen to each and every episode, including the ones no longer available on iTunes. You can also find links to all of our social media. We are at Spooky Ass Shit on both Twitter and Instagram, and you can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/spookyas. While you're there, don't forget to join our secret closed group where you can talk about all the nasty little secrets you want to talk about without the weight of public judgment. That is the Spookaroos. So look for that on Facebook. All right, then. Jessie Costello. Why are we talking about her? Well, first of all, I learned about Jessie Costello because I was actually working on another episode, and I was trying to find pictures of, sadly, this little girl who was murdered. And I did find some, and they were on a website called historicimages.com, I believe, which last time I checked was closed for renovation. Hopefully it will be back. It's a website that has all these like former press photos that are just like on the shelf. So they sell them. And so I bought this picture of this girl who had been murdered so I could have a nice clean picture to put on my website, right? That got me thinking about like other cases and trials that have happened in Massachusetts. And I came across this picture And the caption said, like, oh, this is Jessie Costello. She was on trial for murder, but in this picture, she's holding her child and smiling in jail. And I was like, what? That's kind of a weird, like, dichotomy. And then I Googled her name, and I didn't even know the half of it. This lady is a character, to put it mildly.
Very mildly.
Yes. We had never heard of her until you were like, okay, these are what we're going to talk about. Like, pick the one that interests you most. And we both looked her up. Well, Olivia was like, we could do this one or maybe this one. And I emailed her back and I was like, I already typed a response. I'm hitting send. We're doing Jessie Costello.
Let's just get into her story then. Jessie Costello was born on September 15th, 1902 in Peabody, which is how you spell it, how you say it, even though it's spelled Peabody. It's Peabody. And she was known to be something of a wild woman in her youth, according to some sources. She was a flapper, so they say. Not just the popular Halloween costume, but the actual thing, with the fringes and the shaking and all. At the age of 21, she married a guy named William Costello, who was an Irish Catholic firefighter. Because, of course, he was. Irish Catholics, you had to be either a firefighter or a cop back in those days.
Those were the only options.
Yeah. And or a priest, I guess. But people who knew him say that he spent a lot of time praying. He was a very religious person, but that he also did have some indigestion issues. That happens as we get older, I think. Your stomach can't handle everything it used to. But our story really picks up in February of 1933. So this is Jessie Costello would have been about 30, 31 at this time. And a woman named Nellie Ayres, who was a door-to-door fudge selling person, which I'm sure I could have said that more smoothly, but we're going to go with it. She was a fudge selling person. She went to the Costello home. Now, I don't know what it's like in Missouri. Do you have door-to-door fudge peddlers?
Not in St. Louis.
No, but one time, this is a completely true story. A little kid knocked on our front door at our old apartment in a different neighborhood and tried to sell me a popsicle out of his backpack.
No.
Yes.
No. Oh.
I mean, was it still frozen?
It was like melty. It was frozen, but I was like, no. I was like, here's $1. Like, go away.
But keep your popsicle.
Yeah, I don't want your backpack popsicle.
Well, I mean, you got to give him points for being an entrepreneur.
Oh, yeah. The kids out here are definitely hustling anything they can get their hands on for that summer fun money.
True.
Yeah. So anyway, this Nellie Ayres, she must have been a pretty good saleswoman because Jessie agrees to buy some fudge from her. And Jessie says, okay, let me just go upstairs and get the money and I'll come right back down and I'll buy 1 pound of fudge from you. She takes the fudge, though. And she goes upstairs to get the money. But she comes back downstairs and she's screaming. And she says, oh my God, my husband's upstairs. He's dead on the bathroom floor. And the fudge peddler is like, oh, that's terrible. Hey, what'd you do with that fudge? And Jessie's like, oh, I can't think about fudge right now. My husband's dead. Get out of here. I got to call the cops and stuff. And she sends her like away. Cause like, I mean, even if you're a hardcore salesman, are you going to like stick around and like demand your fudge money from a freshly minted widow?
I can't say that I would.
I don't think I would have believed her.
Also,
like, bitch, give me my fudge or give me the money. Like, go deal with your dead husband afterwards. Like, if he really is dead, I would not have believed her.
Olivia, don't fuck around.
That is the truth.
The police do arrive and they take William's body and they perform an autopsy on him. And at the autopsy, it is discovered that he has cyanide in his system. Cyanide, of course, is a poison, which will kill you dead should you drink it or eat it or however you ingest it. So on March 17th, 1933, Jessie Costello is arrested for the murder of her husband, William. Now, at this time, I mean, we like to think like maybe 1933 isn't all that long ago, but it definitely was a different time. And we are going to see some sexism and some objectification going on here. I know that you two are millennials, and there are certain crimes that millennials are not supposed to abide. However, we will be discussing Jessie's looks because it comes up in the case, as a matter of fact.
Oh, yeah. It's a main point.
We definitely talked about it some when we were researching.
And I assume
have
that you've seen
opinions.
pictures.
Yes.
Yep.
of
Oh,
her.
yes.
Okay. Now, like I said, this is a different time. So there's an all-male jury selected. It's not a jury of her peers exactly. It's an all-male jury. And Peabody is the town right next to Salem. So the trial takes place in the big city, Salem, right? And at first, it's no big deal. But the reporters who start covering the case, they're like, hey, this Jessie, she's kind of hot, right? So they keep snapping pictures, and they describe her in the press. They keep talking about her good looks and how charming she was, and they call her, quote, a glamorous siren. And my favorite, a buxom prima donna.
Yes.
Now, I got to be honest with you. I looked at the pictures of this lady. Kind of looks like my Nana, I would say. Like, not a bad-looking lady.
No, not at all.
But there's one picture of her that's very flattering, where she's kind of doing like an over-the-shoulder kind of thing.
Yes. That's the one where I would describe her as like a buxom, like a siren, or like a stunning person, like
Yeah.
coy.
Yeah.
Well, that must have been like the one picture that everyone saw of her. Because in the one where she's like walking down the stairs and they like tied up on her face, like a little bit Margaret
Yes.
Hamilton from Wizard of Oz, like, you know. She's got some heavy eyebrow going on.
Definitely.
Which I ain't hating. I'm just stating. All right.
That might work today.
That works today.
Eyebrows
for
are the
sure.
trend.
Eyebrows are in, but like that hair, which I know it was like a stylish bob for the time, but it's just like plastered against her skull, and then just like barely, she doesn't have enough hair to like make it nice, like a nice little bob that you would want. But they probably didn't use like hair extensions back then or anything.
My first reaction was, that is Daniel Radcliffe in drag.
That's not terrible. Yeah, I could see that.
Still handsome.
Yeah. She's a handsome lady. Yes.
The press goes on. They say this is another quote, that she had, quote, she had all the modest sex appeal of Lady Godiva, plus clothing, but minus the horse.
I wish somebody'd say that about me.
Oh God. Yeah.
Now she was known to be lapping up the celebrity of all this. There's a lot of pictures of her online, and as I said, even through that website, I wish they were still available. I'd take a look at them again, but the website's down right now. But pictures all over the place. She was even posing in the cemetery, putting flowers on her husband's grave while this trial was going on. So she was like in it. She was down to be like what they dubbed the smiling widow.
Oh yeah, she was soaking in that celebrity 15 minutes of fame.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this is all she wanted.
Definitely a precursor to, like, our modern day, what's the actress's name? Our Roxy Hart.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, well, part of me wonders if this partly inspired that, because this happened in the 30s, which is when Chicago is set, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe this is one of the cases that kind of called for that. And she kind of lives kind of a Roxy life.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert, but yeah. So it gets stranger still as far as the courtroom goes. Like, it's already weird that the press is kind of latched onto her, but they're not the only ones. Basically, like, the jury, it seems like, kind of falls in love with her. And one of them is like, hey, would it be like out of line for me to buy her a box of chocolates? Like, he actually asked that of the judge, and the judge, I don't have a record of what the answer was, but it should have been like, hey, how about you get off the jury?
Right.
And that was not the case. They even formed a barbershop quartet and would sing to her during breaks in the case.
That's my favorite thing about this whole story.
Yes.
I mean, this is really, honestly, a horrible story of a woman who murdered a poor innocent man, in theory. But that there is a certain charm to that. I mean, even today, if like a barbershop quartet sprang up to sing to, I don't know, some horrible woman, that would still be like news. You'd be like, I mean, this is a horrible case, but that is rather amusing.
Everybody can root for love.
Yeah, totally.
But again, the jury, they weren't the only people. So far, she's got the press, she's got the jury, she also has the bailiff of the court. Because each day, he brings her a rose.
Not allowed. That's not allowed.
No. You'd be fired.
Try to imagine like any woman from recent times that's been arrested and what would happen if
I'm picturing that serial killer who killed all the truck drivers.
Eileen Wuornos.
Yes.
Okay,
If someone gave
big
her
difference
roses.
though. And again,
Yes.
That's true.
I mean, just saying, Eileen Wuornos, not a particularly attractive lady.
No.
No, definitely not.
But wow, who's the one? It's not murder, but that teacher that slept with her student. That was like, there's been a few that were actually like rather attractive.
I think the one that everyone talks about is Pamela Smart. She like slept with one of her students and then coerced and kind of forced him into killing her husband. I don't know if he actually died. I don't know that case very well.
Oh.
But I do know that she tried to make him murder him so she wouldn't have to do it.
Oh my gosh.
Well, that's a good one for another day.
Yes.
So anyway, so the bailiff fell in love with her too. All these people were in love with her. But the problem was there was actually a good amount of evidence against Jessie. So it didn't really look that good because the pharmacist of town, of Peabody, said that he had sold Jessie cyanide the day of her husband's death. And he said to her, hey, I can sell you this stuff, but you got to be really careful with it because it's actually like super poisonous. And her response was, you call that poison?
She knew
And
what
she
she
said-
was doing.
She's
Oh,
like,
yeah.
she's like, no, I'm just trying to picture this scene. Like she turns to him and she's like, no, this definitely isn't for poisoning my husband. I'm buying this to clean my stove. That's what she says though. Like, yeah, no, it's poison. This is like stove cleaner. That's what I'm using it for. She says that her husband's indigestion was really getting to him and he had all this stomach pain. And that is why she believes he committed suicide. I just want to say, shades of the Kurt Cobain story here. Courtney Love,
Oh yeah.
you don't look too
Yeah.
innocent to me. That's all I'm saying, girl.
Also, would a person that suffers from indigestion commit suicide by
By
ingesting
ingesting
poison?
cyanide.
I don't know if they would go that way.
And maybe
That's
I'm
just
thinking of
gonna fuck
arsenic,
up your
but
stomach more.
I mean, maybe they're both really bad. But isn't one of them like really painful? Like,
I think cyanide is like doesn't it make you like foam?
I was gonna
and,
say, is that
like,
the foamy one?
like convulse?
I think so, yeah. I mean, I think that both of them are probably... I mean, I think depending on the dosage, both could be fairly quick, but I know arsenic is like, if it's enough, it's very fast. But
like still painful. You're not just
Right.
like going to sleep
no,
and dying.
you're like choking to death.
Oh.
I would advise everyone not to try either one.
Yeah, don't.
Yeah, don't do that.
So she says this, and then the prosecution says, okay, but the thing is, we found capsules in his stomach, and the capsules, we have the pharmacist again who says that you bought these gel capsules, like within the month of your husband's death, and then you bought the cyanide the same day. So that seems a little suspicious. And she just says, I've never even seen capsules like that. I don't know what you're talking about.
Where are the receipts?
Girl, don't lie.
Oh, by the way, the songs, I forgot to mention this part. The songs that the barbershop quartet were reported as singing were Sweet Adelaide, which I think most of us know. That's like the stereotypical barbershop quartet song. And then My Wild Irish Rose, which I don't think I do know that one.
So glad that you brought that up because we didn't know what that song was and we looked it up And who was singing it?
I don't know, and I
can't-
want to forget that we listened.
It was like George someone, and it was...
It's definitely a George.
Oh, man. It was not a love song. It was very depressing.
Yeah, the video is like this homeless veteran and like flashbacks to the war, and then like fast forward to like this poor homeless veteran like who's a drunk, and
It's not good.
yeah, it's bad. It's not romantic, it's not sweet. The video's not sweet. It's all bad.
Well, again, it was different times. Maybe that's how you wooed a lady back then.
Maybe.
Now, it was during the trial that a police officer came forward by the name of Ed McMahon. Now, it's not that Ed McMahon. Do you guys even know who Ed McMahon is?
Yes.
These youngsters.
No. I do not.
He was Johnny Carson's sidekick on The Tonight Show.
Oh.
And he also hosted Star Search. And
Okay.
he did the Publishers Clearinghouse commercials as well. He used to bring big checks to people's doors and say, "You've won $10 million or something."
You would know his voice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, it wasn't him. It was a different Ed McMahon. I just like to point out when I'm having people that are younger to make, because look, I'm not like, I'm a few years older than you guys, but I'm not like crazy old yet. Getting there, but not there yet. I'm an old young man, soon to be a young old man.
Well, if those are always going hand in hand, then you're totally fine.
Yeah. This police officer, Ed McMahon, comes forward and he says, "Look, I'm going to be honest with you people. This woman, Jessie, is like mad slutty. And I've had an affair with her, but also she's like been throwing it all around town. She's like a flapper and she's into like really wild stuff. And she says that she feels trapped with her Irish Catholic husband. And we had this like long ass affair, and he went into great detail, but you can't find a lot of the detail because the press refused to publish his report, saying it was too scandalous. Except they did release a little red book. One of the court reporters put out a little red book with all the details, and it sold, according to the article that I read, like hotcakes. The publication sold out. I wasn't able to find a copy of that, but I would be interested to read it.
Could you imagine?
I would literally love to read that. I would love nothing more.
There's a rare bookstore near me. I'm going to see if they can track that down for me.
Yeah.
Now, there's something I want to point out here that the articles I found don't mention, but traditionally, my father was a firefighter, and traditionally, police and firefighters, there's kind of a rivalry between the two.
Oh.
In my humble opinion, again, my father was a firefighter, so maybe I'm biased, but firefighters, I think cops tend to have a chip on their shoulder because everybody loves firefighters. Not everybody loves cops. Like,
Yes.
firefighters only show up to help. Cops
Yes.
don't only show up to help, right? So I think that's where a lot of it comes from. People are a little bit mistrustful, and then firefighters get a lot of, praise and like, oh, they're heroes, and cops, they get that, but they also sometimes get like, oh, why do you shoot black people, and all this stuff. So
Very real.
I think that's where part of that rivalry comes in, but I just think that's worth noting. Like, not only was she cheating, but she was cheating with a cop.
Right. That would have to
Allegedly.
be part of the story at that point.
Yeah.
Allegedly. And it'd only be more interesting too, like if he was like Protestant or something, like if he wasn't Catholic or like,
That would
something like
kill
that.
it for everyone. Everyone would have to buy. I mean, everyone already did buy that book, but that would just add another layer.
Yeah. But yeah, so he says basically like, look, she was a wild young woman and felt trapped in this marriage, and she wanted out, and she's been running all around town. And I know that she's guilty of doing this, so that's why I'm coming forward and telling everybody that she's guilty of doing this. But the press dubs him the kiss and tell cop. And he becomes basically like the villain of the trial somehow. Like he's the bad guy coming in and saying all this horrible things about our sweet little ingenue, who didn't even know what poison was or what capsules were. And this is my favorite part because I've read several articles about it and they all say the same thing and nobody explains what the fuck this means. But Jessie denied having an affair, but she did admit to knowing Ed McMahon, but she said that their relationship was, quote, purely spiritual.
They fucking.
I think that's just polite speak for they're doing things other people aren't allowed to watch.
Yeah.
It's purely spiritual.
Yeah. Maybe
Okay.
it was to them.
Doubtful.
Maybe she meant physical. It was purely physical.
Yes.
So despite all this evidence against her, which includes the pharmacist testimony, friends coming forward who said that, you know, William Costello had been in fine health, and as far as they knew, like, you know, these stomach issues weren't that bad that he would kill himself or anything. They also came forward and said, hey, did anyone notice that Jessie, like, didn't even wait till his funeral before she tried to collect that life insurance? So that was another little issue they brought up. Despite all of this, Jessie was acquitted.
Yes, she was. Crazy.
Edmund Pearsons, who was a journalist covering the case, he says, quote, the jury was helpless as 12 rabbits under the influence of those glittering ophidian eyes.
I copied down that same quote.
Yeah, I mean, look, again, I know the 30s were a different time. And this reminds me a lot of the Lizzie Borden trial because a lot of people in that, when they talk about that trial, they talk about how she kind of got off in part because men of the time just couldn't believe that a woman would, especially she wasn't like a young woman, she was in her 30s, but a relatively young woman would be capable of committing an axe murder on two people. And so again, this kind of, you get kind of shades of that here too. But Jessie, she wasn't done after the court. Like you would think, okay, she got off. Maybe now she's going to go home, relax. This was before the internet. It's not like she gained like hundreds of Instagram followers or something after this. And you would think she would just go home and be like, hey, I got away with it. I got the money. I got that fudge that I stole. And life is good. I'm just going to chill with my kids now, right? That is not what she did at all. She was offered a contract to appear on Broadway, and she went and received $1,100 to appear on stage for 4 days, just to appear. She didn't have to sing or dance or act or nothing. She just had to show up and be on stage, I assume as part of somebody's show, or maybe to do like a Q&A or something. I can tell you this one hurts me personally. I did go to the Boston Conservatory as a musical theater major. Have not been on Broadway.
It's very sad. It's upsetting.
Yes, I know. And we looked up today. That is $16,000 what she made.
Damn, girl.
For 4 days.
4 days of appearing.
Yep.
It's so sad.
Yeah, and after this, she hired an agent, and she was also asked to perform screen tests for Hollywood studios. She was offered a $20,000 contract, which in that money, that, I mean, you just said that was what, 16? So
Yeah, 1,100 was like 16,000. So
20,000 in them days, that's like, damn,
a lot.
That's math I can't do, and I'm jealous.
That's mathing. Yeah. I mean, $20,000. But anyway, she was offered $20,000 to appear in a 10-week-long burlesque show. Now, I don't know exactly what they mean by burlesque show, but in the parlance of that time, it means it's kind of different now, but it really honestly did mean strippers back then.
Yeah.
But for 20 grand, I would strip. I mean, damn.
Same.
I would strip for less than 20 grand.
Like in today's money, let alone like
Yeah,
that
right.
was
Let
like
it just
a
in
million
today's,
something back in
right.
them days. But Jessie apparently thought this was beneath her. And by the way, You can't tell by the pictures because, she's dressed kind of modestly, which is good considering she's on trial for murder. She did at least have that much, tact to dress modestly. She's kind of dressed Puritan style. You can't really get a good look at her figure, but they do call her buxom in the newspaper and everything. So you figure she was rather a chesty gal. So maybe that too is why, because aside from that one picture, the face isn't like anything to write home about. But maybe she just had like really nice boobs.
Maybe she did, because I was looking at those pictures too, and I was actually joking. We were talking about how I always joke about how, like, us strong-ass Irish women, you just got an Irish back, like, you can tell you got to dress for that figure, and she was not doing it at the time. So to hear that someone wanted to pay her to take her clothes off, I was like, 1, I am heartened, and 2, don't do it. Don't do it, sis.
Well, she didn't. She did not. She refused to appear in the burlesque show. She thought it was beneath her. So what she did instead was she started to go on a spending spree. She got fancy new clothes. She went on vacation. She went around like she was a celebrity. She was giving interviews to Walter Winchell of the New York Daily Mirror and Ed Sullivan. Yes, that Ed Sullivan of the New York Daily News at the time. Of course, he'd go on to host his very famous TV show where America discovered the Beatles and Elvis Presley. Now, unfortunately, this was also kind of the end of the line for her. And they didn't give a timeline in the articles that I read, but her fame was very short-lived, apparently, because the Hollywood censorship was just coming in at the time, right? With the Hagues Act and everything. And they were like, hey, we know that you want to do these screen tests with this murderess, but the thing is, we're not going to let her be in movies, because if you put her in movies, we're not going to allow them to be released, because she probably murdered a guy. And so they canceled all the screen tests on her. So then the studios were like, well, if we can't use her, we can't use her. There's no point in bringing her out. And then when that sheen kind of wore off and then the press wasn't interested anymore because the trial was over and everything, she just kind of went back into obscurity, right? She even went back to the burlesque show and said, hey, remember how you offered me 20 grand? Well, I'm still available and I've changed my mind. Here's me and my giant boobs. Let's do this. Unfortunately, the burlesque show had changed their mind on Jessie, and they said, oh, you know what? Now that we see your face up close, not that interested. So, without being able to find any other work, Jessie becomes a hostess at a Boston tavern owned by Jack Sharkey. Jack Sharkey was a world heavyweight boxing champion, and he had nicknames Shark Boy, and my favorite, the Boston Gob.
Oh my gosh, yes.
In October of 1933. Now, this is why I say it must have been so short, her time in the spotlight, because already by October of the same year, she only really became a celebrity that March, right? And now by October of the same year, she's trying to find like new venues to be famous in. So what does she do? She does what all great sinners do. She finds Jesus.
Bless.
She says that yes, now she's found God, and she begins to run around with a evangelist preacher from Los Angeles named Mrs. Amy Semple McPherson. Have you seen the picture of these two standing together?
Oh, yes.
I don't know if I saw that one.
She's like way thin and blonde and has the same bad hair.
Oh, great.
And they have like children in front of them. And it's like, you're not sure what's going on. They kind of look like nurses.
Yeah, because they're wearing like, I mean, Amy McPherson is dressed like a weird, well, honestly, she looks, I assume that they're supposed to be like angelic kind of priesty kind of robes. But she looks a little KKK-ish.
Yes. Yes.
Oh, no.
Especially because she's like tall, thin, pale, and blonde. Like visibly blonde, especially even in like a black and white photo standing next to Jessie. Yeah.
Hindsight.
And I think that that the kids are probably Jessie's. I don't know for sure, but that's my guess.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
That makes sense.
that part's
Yeah.
not as creepy, maybe, but
Yeah.
as it might seem at first. But it's still weird. But unfortunately for them, Jessie Costello and her children are evicted from their lavish home that she bought after the murder with the insurance money and all, and her New York contract and all. And she's not heard from again. But people still loved her. There was a farmer from New Hampshire who came to her apartment, and he knew that she was on welfare and everything by this point, and he asked her to marry him. But she said, "No, I'm not going to marry you because this is just a temporary setback. I will be a star again." She says, quote, "I shall climb again." Unfortunately, she does not. And she dies on March 15th, 1971, at the age of 68. And that is the story of Jessie Costello. So, ladies, let's kind of wrap this up. I think a good way to think about it for me is, or an interesting way anyway, is we kind of hinted at it earlier. This is the kind of celebrity that you don't really think of as existing back in those days. Maybe even the fascination with true crime and the more lore details and everything. It's easy to think of like society now and how we're into this stuff. But in olden days, they were simpler folk. They were kinder folk, gentler, But it just goes to show people were always like this.
Oh, yeah. And I think then it was so taboo. One of the articles I read kind of mentioned like their opinion about why the jurors found her like not guilty and acquitted her was because none of them wanted to ruin the fun. Everyone was just having so much fun with Jessie and the papers and this crazy story and all the drama. Like no one wanted to actually find her guilty and say that you guys have been soaking all of this up and like following this woman around and she's a murderer. Like, So they just found her not guilty to just continue on the fun. So no one felt bad about it.
A lot of people they probably back then also loved this kind of stuff, or at least they didn't know what that was. That when you're reading something like that, it's like you see a car wreck or a train wreck and you can't help but watch it. I'm sure that existed then, but it was a lot more like people were just telling you constantly you can't think about stuff like that, you can't read things like that, you can't view material that's obscene. So I'm sure there were people that were loving it and getting their hands on everything that they could, crime-wise or about scandals. There's just no public outlet at that point. So for word to travel like it did in some cases, like Jessie Costello and Lizzie Borden, it's just like that's how truly sensational those things were. Because today, like, you can go viral for doing dumb shit on BuzzFeed. You could have one YouTube video and become a millionaire.
Yeah.
But now, like, back then, it's just the difference in how information was spread is crazy.
Yeah.
This might be beyond the scope of the episode, but I know that you guys are true crime people. I'm a true crime person. Most of my listeners are. What do you think it is that draws you to it? Because I bet that it's a lot of the same motivations that people have always had. So that's why I'm kind of curious. Because in a way, you kind of, if you're like me, and I'm sure that you probably are, sometimes you kind of feel bad. Like when I was talking about earlier, that case with the little girl who was murdered, I felt bad when I was holding that picture. And I kind of questioned myself. And even when I'm witch finding, I kind of question myself. And I think, like, am I exploiting this? And the honest answer is, yeah, a little bit. Like, a little bit. But do I need to feel like terrible about it? And I've done a lot of soul searching on it. What do you guys think about those? Do you ever have those thoughts, first of all? Or are you just like, no, I just like this stuff?
No, definitely have those thoughts.
Oh, yeah.
I think some of it, at least for me, like, I think it's kind of similar to enjoying horror movies. Or even like for people who aren't into either of those things, like people who like roller coasters. Like it's that sensation of being afraid and like kind of terrified and like this, like from an outsider, looking in, like getting that kind of thrill. Not to say that murder is like a thrill, but like, like just like reading about it and researching on it kind of gives you a step in to be like a little afraid. And like that's,
right.
I mean, I like being afraid.
That's just what I was going to say, is that people like being afraid and testing their limits, no matter what the situation is. If it's a fictional horror movie, a fictional horror book, or if it's a true crime novel, if it's staying home late at night and watching SVU, if it's like we do, just finding those certain cases that like you cannot get enough of, and you will read the most horrendous details of a crime. And I think that we subject ourselves to that because we want to know that, like, we want to experience in the most far away way possible what humanity can do.
Yeah.
I think mine is knowing, like, if I can read a case about someone like Mary Vincent who was attacked as a hitchhiker and left for dead in a ravine, there's no way or reason on earth that she should have survived that attack, but she did. So even though most of these cases do end in a death, knowing, like, what the human body can take, what your mind can take, and trying to see, like, okay, I know I'm not that person. I'm not that brave, but I want to feel brave.
Right.
And if you can tell those stories in a way that always remembers, like, this is true, and always make your decisions based on your reporting, your storytelling, how you take that material in, if you can always keep that at the forefront, then what you're doing shouldn't make you feel bad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Good point. So, ladies, why don't you tell everyone where they can find your show?
Of course. We are on all major podcast platforms at Death by Champagne Podcast. And if you want to follow us on social media, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at deadfromchamps, CHAMPS. And then if anybody hears this and wants to send us anything or get in touch with us, our Gmail is deathbychamps@gmail.com.
Very good. And once again, I'll just remind everyone to check out my website, spookyas.com or spookyasshit.com. Follow me. Forget Twitter. I don't really use it. I have a very pathetic number of followers. Like, I think I got like 40. I logged in the other day and I realized I hadn't logged in since November.
Oh, no.
That's how we are. We check it a lot, but we just that's where we fail at being millennial. We don't know how to tweet.
We don't know how to Twitter.
And but Instagram, you can find. I do post Instagram almost every day. That is at Spooky Ass Shit. And of course on Facebook, I'm on there often enough checking messages and stuff. And that's facebook.com/spookyas. And yeah, so I think if you like my show, if you like Case File or Last Podcast on the Left or My Favorite Murder, then you would like Death by Champagne. So I would recommend you check these ladies out. And also, they're cool, and they were not fucking with me.
Never.
Thank you for having us on. We're really
Right.
excited. This was
Thanks for
great.
coming on. Like I said, I know you guys are very busy in your personal lives at the moment, so I appreciate you taking the time to
Absolutely.
come on and chat.
Let's stay in touch, and then when we come back to Salem, we'll meet up.
Oh, yeah. We'll for sure be back, so you can give us a good tour.
All right. Thank you, Olivia, Mackenzie, once again, for being here. Check out their podcast, Death by Champagne. And until next time, don't be afraid. I'll say it correctly, which sounds wrong to me, but crayon.
Crayon. I say crayon.
I am with you, Olivia. Thank you. You're the first person that I've met that says it that way, though.
Oh, my God.
Everyone laughs at me, and I didn't even know that I was wrong until like a couple years ago.
Same. I think I learned like early college that I was incorrect on that. It's a crayon.
Yeah.